Imagine someone told you this detective story. A detective arrives at a murder scene and finds that the victim's wedding ring is missing. And then he interviews the victim's husband. And then he questions a witness. And then the witness dies. And then the detective realizes he's dealing with a dangerous killer. Did you notice what was missing? Nothing about that story is technically wrong. The events happen in a logical order, but it doesn't really feel like a story. It feels more like a list of things that happened. There's actually a reason for that. One of the most valuable storytelling lessons I ever learned came from an unlikely source, the creators of South Park. Now, whether you enjoy that show or not, Trey Parker and Matt Stone made an observation about storytelling that I think every writer should understand. They said if you are outlining your story and the events are connected by the words "and then," you probably have a problem. Instead, every major event should be connected by either the word "but" or "therefore." It's an incredibly simple idea, but once you understand it, you'll start noticing it everywhere. In great novels, in great movies, and unfortunately, you'll also notice when stories don't use it. I'm Jake Winters, and today I want to talk to you about why this one simple rule can completely transform the way you think about storytelling. Let's rewrite the same detective story. A detective arrives at a murder scene and notices that the victim's wedding ring is missing. Therefore, he concludes that the robbery was staged and begins to focus on the victim's family rather than his coworkers. He interviews the victim's husband. But the husband has an alibi that is confirmed by a witness. Therefore, the detective tracks down the witness who confirmed it. But the witness begins acting nervous during questioning. Therefore, the detective realizes the alibi may have been fabricated. But before he can press further, the witness is found dead. Therefore, the detective realizes he's dealing with a dangerous killer who is actively eliminating anyone who could expose the truth. Notice what changed. The detective isn't simply moving from one scene to the next because that's what detectives do. Every conclusion forces a new decision. Every new decision uncovers another obstacle, and every obstacle changes the direction of the investigation. The story isn't moving forward simply because time is passing. It's moving forward because every scene drives the next one. Think about real life. Every important event changes the options available afterward. You miss your flight. Therefore, you're forced to spend the night in another city. But while you're waiting at the airport, you run into an old friend you haven't seen in years. Therefore, the plans you had for the next few days suddenly change. Great stories work the same way. Every important event changes what can happen next. Readers don't just want events. They want to feel that every event matters and that every decision matters. A great example of this principle in action comes from Harlan Coben's Netflix series, Safe. The story begins when Tom Delaney's teenage daughter goes missing after a party. Therefore, Tom begins investigating on his own because he doesn't believe he's getting the whole truth. He questions friends, neighbors, and other parents. But every answer uncovers another secret that someone has been hiding. Those secrets don't simply provide background information. They completely change what Tom believes about the people around him. Therefore, he shifts his investigation in a new direction. That investigation exposes another lie. But solving one mystery immediately reveals an even bigger one. Tom discovers that nearly every family in the neighborhood is hiding something completely unrelated to his daughter's disappearance. Because everyone is lying about something, every interview sends the investigation in a different direction. The entire series unfolds like this. Every answer creates a new question. Every discovery forces Tom to make another decision. Every decision uncovers another layer of deception. Nothing feels random. The plot isn't simply moving forward because the writers decided it was time for another twist. It's moving forward because each revelation changes what Tom must do next. That's one of the reasons Harlan Coben's thrillers are so addictive. You aren't watching just to find out what happens next. You're watching because you need to know where the last revelation will lead. This idea doesn't only apply to plot. It also applies to character growth. Imagine your protagonist starts out selfish. Then, halfway through the novel, they suddenly risk their life to save someone else. That moment doesn't feel earned. Why? Because nothing changed them. Instead, imagine this. They make a selfish decision, but someone innocent gets hurt. Therefore, the protagonist begins questioning the kind of person they've become. They try to do the right thing, but it costs them their career, their reputation, or someone they care about. Therefore, they're finally faced with one impossible choice: to sacrifice themselves for someone else. Character arcs work the same way plots do. People don't usually change overnight. They change because each experience forces them to become someone different than they were before. One of my favorite examples of this is Ebenezer Scrooge in A Christmas Carol. Scrooge doesn't suddenly become generous halfway through the story. Instead, he's confronted by the ghost of Christmas past and is forced to reflect on who he used to be. The ghost of Christmas present shows Scrooge the suffering he's causing to the people around him, which causes him to see the world differently. And finally, the ghost of Christmas future forces him to face his own death. The character transformation feels earned. Each scene builds upon the next. At first glance, it might just seem like I'm listing a series of events that happen in the story, but I want you to take a closer look. Pause this video and take a minute to think through Scrooge's character arc and how each new development is connected by a but or a therefore, rather than simply and then. When I wrote my first novel, I wasn't consciously thinking about this idea. Sometimes I'd write scenes simply because they sounded interesting. Only later would I ask, why does this scene actually exist? During revisions, I found myself cutting entire chapters because nothing depended on them. If I removed the chapter, the rest of the story barely changed. They were just there. When I wrote my second novel, I started looking for and then moments. If two chapters were only connected because one event happened after the other, I knew something was missing. At the end of every major scene, I'd ask myself two questions. 1, does this scene create a new obstacle? That's the but. And 2, does this force my character to make a new decision? That's the therefore. Once I started writing that way, the entire story became much stronger. Now, like almost every writing rule, this one isn't absolute. Sometimes you intentionally want a quiet scene, a moment where characters simply breathe, a conversation, a joke, a chance for the reader to relax. Not every scene has to escalate the plot, but even those quieter moments usually accomplish something. They deepen relationships, reveal character, create emotional contrast, or quietly set up something that will matter later. Very few great scenes exist for no reason. One of the hardest things about writing is that readers only see the finished story. They don't see the hundreds of tiny decisions that make the story feel inevitable. The but and therefore rule is one of the simplest ways to test whether your story has momentum. When you finish this video, think about one of your favorite stories, or pull out something you're writing yourself. Between every major event, ask yourself one question. Is this connected by and then? Or is it connected by but or therefore? You might be surprised by how clearly you can see the structure underneath the story. And when you apply the same test to your own work, you may quickly spot the scenes that need strengthening. If the story is mostly connected by and then, you probably have a sequence of events. But if its major events are connected by but or therefore, you have a story with momentum. And that's where compelling storytelling lives. If you enjoy videos about crime thrillers, storytelling, writing, and publishing, I'd love to have you subscribe. I post new videos every week. And let me know in the comments, what's a movie or a novel that you think does this exceptionally well? I'd love to hear your examples. I'm Jake Winters. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.